The year is 1973, the place, near Somerset, England. Gabriella Versace was taken on board an alien spaceship near a small village in Somerset, England. She was physically inspected after being strapped to an examination table. On October 16, 1973, at about 2:00 a.m., Gabriella Versace was driving on the motorway and had just passed the Langford Budville, England exit. The highway seemed completely deserted, but she saw the glare of a single headlight ahead of her that seemed to be stationary. As she got closer, she saw that it was too bright to be a headlight. Her car suddenly began to lose power. The headlights flickered, dimmed, and then cut out. Next, the engine faltered, sputtered, then fell silent. Panic-stricken, Mrs. Versace pressed her face to the windscreen, struggling to steer the car to a halt in the almost complete darkness. Thinking she could not stay there alone in the vehicle, she climbed out the car. She fumbled with the car hood as she lifted it, and as she stood there feeling helpless, she noticed a humming sound, faint at first, that seemed to be growing stronger. She could not see the source of the hum. As she stood facing the car, a heavy hand came down on her shoulder and pushed her to the ground. She struggled to face her assailant and saw a tall, dark-colored metallic figure. Gabriella then saw flickering multicolored lights and blacked out. When she came to, she was standing in a field. The robot-like figure was standing next to her, and before them stood a strange bright object. It was half-moon-shaped, rounded on top and flat on the bottom. It was silver-gray in color and rested on thick legs, of which she saw two, but there might have been more. It was about 20 feet in height and 40 feet across, and it had large, oblong windows in the middle from which yellow lights issued. Gabriella now realized that the humming sound came from this object. She then blacked out for a second time. She awoke inside a strange room. It was circular, and she was strapped to a table in the center. She was naked but covered with a light blue blanket. Her wrists were bound to the table by what she described as large rubber bands. Her spread-eagle legs were restrained in the same manner, with the bands holding her ankles to the cold surface of the table. The inside of the craft was freezing. She glanced over to a far wall where the robot stood inactive. To her right was a console covered in buttons and dials. The floor was covered in what appeared to be black-colored rubber matting. A few moments later, 3 humanoids that came into view probed her. 2 stood to the left of the table, while the third went to the foot of the table and picked up some boxes or cubes. He placed 3 of the objects on a rail, which ran the length of the table, 1 by her head, 1 by her feet, and 1 in the middle. As soon as the cubes were placed on the rail, they began to glow. The 3 humanoids were all about the same height, 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall. Fair-skinned and slim in build, they wore the same garments. All wore a skull cap, tied at the back of the head and ending just above the eyes. Face masks covered the nose and mouth, so only the eyes and upper face were visible. No hair was visible, but she could make out the hair bumps under the caps. The eyes were more rounded than normal human eyes, and seemed emotionless. All 3 humanoids wore a tunic with a gray-colored edging, long gloves that went to the elbows, and very long aprons that fell as far as their ankles. Thick-soled boots covered their feet. Every piece of clothing was light blue in color. Throughout the episode, none of the humanoids spoke or made any other noise. They looked at each other frequently and nodded occasionally. Furthermore, they did not appear to breathe, making no respiratory noises. During the examination, none of the 3 beings touched Gabriella. The humanoid at the bottom of the bed took a number of gray-colored instruments, which he used one by one. A small knife-like implement was used to take an ale pairing from her right-hand index finger. A blood sample was taken with a small plastic-looking bottle with tubes and wires attached. Her blanket was removed and a thin pencil-like device was used to prod and probe her, and a large black rubber suction device was used on the area around the groin. Soon the examiner placed another blanket over her, which provided badly needed warmth. Noticing her frequent glances towards the now inactive robot, the examiner now spoke to her in perfect English. The robot was a trained retriever device. It did all the manual work outside the ship. It brought specimens for examination and study. It was merely an unthinking intelligence that was programmed to do certain tasks. The examiner spoke in a deep male voice, although Gabriella could not see his mouth move beneath the mask. His eyes never blinked, not even once. His movements appeared practiced, deliberate, and precise. When he completed his task, all three humanoids left the room together. After several minutes, Gabriella caught sight of the robot again. A flashing purple-colored light was coming from it. It did not move but remained by the wall. Soon one of the humanoids came into view from behind her and walked to the far end of the table. He lifted the end of the blanket from the bottom and stared at her body. At this point she felt something awful was going to happen, and Gabriella struggled with her bonds but could not free herself. The being took a small pin and placed it on her thigh. Gabriella stopped struggling immediately. The device caused numbness in every part of her body apart from her head. The being climbed slowly on the bottom of the bed and slowly and without emotion raped her. She felt discomfort but no pain. Soon the three humanoids came into the room and released her from the table. Gabriella looked down on the floor to see her clothes before passing out one more time that night. When she next regained consciousness, Gabriella was standing, fully clothed, next to her car in the deserted country road. Distraught, she drove home. My take. A terrifying tale for sure. I cannot think of a good reason why someone would make up a story like that. The alternative is very frightening. I could not find much about the aftermath of this encounter. Resources: Thomas E. Bullard, UFO Abductions. The Measure of the Mystery. The year is 1974. The place, Berwyn Mountain, in Llanrilo, Merionethshire, Wales. It's been called the Welsh Roswell, a cold, dark January night when the ground shook and bright lights appeared in the sky above the Berwyn Mountains. A UFO allegedly crashed on the Berwyn Mountain on January 23, 1974. Nighttime hours. Lights and noises were observed that were alleged to be related to a UFO sighting on Cadair Berwyn and Cadair Bronwyn, an incident which has remained surrounded by mystery ever since. Many explanations have been given for what went on in that part of North Wales that evening, from a meteor shower, an earthquake to downplane, or even lamp-wielding poachers on the hillside. But, for many, the belief that a UFO crashed high above Bala Lake, its alien inhabitants quickly spirited away in a military cover-up, has proved hard to shake. According to Northwell, that belief has resurfaced again following a fresh appeal for information in 2018 by a researcher looking to make a documentary about the phenomena for American TV. North Yorkshire UFO investigator Russ Kellett, who has been researching the Berwyn Mountains event for 25 years, has received a further 4 extraordinary claims by people from in and around the affected villages of Llanderfel and Llanrilo who say they were either close to the incident or knew officials involved. One woman, who said she lived very nearby, told Kellett her dad worked for the Ministry of Defense and on that night she heard an enormous bang, the tremor from which measured 3.5 on the Richter scale, and that she and her brother were told to go back to bed. Later in the evening she could hear people talking in the house about making calls, and when she looked out of the window she saw something large being loaded onto the back of a truck, although she did not know what it was. She claimed there were a lot of soldiers in the area. Years later, her dad told her a Russian ship in the Irish Sea had fired a missile in the wrong direction and hit something which came down and was taken away by the military. Meanwhile, retired nurse Pat Evans, who believed an aircraft had crashed, drove to the site and saw a pulsating orange and red glow on the hillside and other lights. In addition, one ex-military man recalled how he'd been working in a team at one end of the A5 and claimed something catastrophic had gone wrong with an underground base that was not manned by people of this world. Finally, Kellett's findings also included a pensioner with links to the RAF and NASA, who stated the organizations had been developing a new weapon to bring down unidentified flying objects, and it had been used successfully that night. The ex-filer says he is keeping an open mind on the latest extraordinary claims in his continued attempts to try and piece together what happened that night. You have to be careful with any new claims that it may be what people have heard or read being repeated back to you, he said. Sometimes there are people who just like to be involved in an event such as this and want to say they were there. On the other hand, why would these people in their 50s, 60s, and 80s contact me to give me these stories? The people who contacted me appeared to be genuine. I have been researching this for 25 years now and am still trying to get to the bottom of what happened that night. My take. There is not much to go on here. No really good eyewitnesses. Anything could have happened on that mountain that night. Maybe a crashed UFO, or more likely something more mundane. Resources. Summary from Nathan Bevan at walesonline.co.uk on December 27, 2018. The year is 1976, the place, somewhere over southern England. An official British Airways film taken during one of Concorde's flights over southern England depicts a white light moving around the fuselage of the aircraft. During the month of June 1976, British Airways was filming a promotional video of one of the first Concorde transatlantic flights. This 1976 footage was recorded by professional equipment from another aircraft that was escorting the Concorde. You can often hear the question, if UFOs appear so often, why are there no reliable videos on which they are captured? As you can see, there is, but at that time, despite the hype in society, after the publication of this video, the authorities were not going to admit the fact of their existence and quickly fabricated an authoritative opinion from respected specialists who, without hesitation, announced this UFO as glare. You can watch this footage for yourself, and you don't need to be a professor to see that when the UFO moves along the side of the plane, the reflection of its light can be seen on the windshield of the Concorde. This proves that this is not a camera artifact, flare, or glare, but a real object actually located in three-dimensional space. On the video you can see the Concorde flying, and a small white UFO drops down from above the Concorde and flies beside it for a while. The UFO then flies away. The UFO only appears to be a few feet across. My take. What we have here, folks, is a Foo Fighter. This is what the military were seeing during World War II. Foo Fighters is a term used by Allied aircraft pilots during World War II to describe various UFOs or mysterious aerial phenomena seen in the skies over both the European and Pacific theaters of operations. Resources. Summary from an Amalien.com on June 26, 2021. The year is 1977. The place, Broadhaven Primary School in Pembrokeshire, United Kingdom. A cigar-shaped craft landed next to the primary school and was witnessed by 14 school children who saw a silver creature. On February 4, 1977, there were no alien invasions or tales of abduction. Yet a UFO sighting by a group of Pembrokeshire school children remains one of the most famous cases in Wales. It was 40 years ago when a class of pupils at Broadhaven Primary School said they spotted a UFO in a field near their playground. It was one of a wave of sightings in the area in 1977, dubbed the Dife Triangle. David Davies was 10 at the time and heard reports of pupils seeing flying saucers throughout the day. I was a natural-born skeptic, so after the bell rang I decided to go to the area that the children said they had seen it. He told BBC Wales. He described seeing a silver cigar-shaped craft with a dome covering the middle third. My sighting only lasted a couple of seconds. It popped up and then went back behind a tree. Mr. Davies said he did not feel afraid, more in awe and wonderment, although he admitted he had a strange desire to run away. None of the teachers believed the children, and so the headmaster separated them and got them to draw what they saw. There were slight variations, but what they drew was basically the same. Mr. Davies described the days that followed as a wild roller coaster. It went crazy with the media, and it was difficult to settle down and actually think about what we had seen. Official explanations were: there is general speculation in the neighborhood that a practical joker may be at work, wrote staff at S4, the government department that investigated sightings at the time. It was also thought school children could have confused a sewage tank as a UFO, although many were from farming backgrounds and would have been familiar with the machinery. More recently, a former U.S. Navy sailor said the figure in a silver suit was in fact a member of U.S. military personnel wearing their standard fireproof uniform, and the UFOs were new Harrier jets flying over. Neil Spring, who wrote a book based on the Broadhaven sightings, advised, "The moment I heard of this small village plagued by UFO sightings, I was inspired to understand what really happened," he said. His research uncovered a secret investigation by the military police. Whilst the government was telling the public they had no records of any unusual activity in the area, privately, officials were so concerned about the UFO sightings in Broadhaven that they asked the military police to conduct a discreet investigation. He said, Mr. Spring believes local pranksters were behind some of the sightings, but said people emulate what's happening around them, and the pranks were inspired by events which had been sincerely reported. My research showed that there were strange occurrences in Broadhaven long before the incident at the school and for long times afterwards. So you can take the children out of the story and you'll still have the story. My take. I like what Emil Williams of the Swansea UFO Network said about the incident. One child can lie, but can a whole class? Over 40 years at least one of them might have come forward to say they made it up. But they haven't. Resources: BBC.com on February 4, 2017.
The year is 1978. The place? Near Skipton, Yorkshire, England. Several British police officers witnessed a UFO silently flying slowly overhead. The object was extremely bright, and no known conventional aircraft matched its description. In January 1978, in the middle of the night, Sergeant Tony Dodd and Police Constable Alan Dale were driving in the vicinity of Cononley near Skipton, Yorkshire, in their official line of duty, when a strange aerial machine came into view. Dodd stated,
"We were going down a country lane and you know what it's like up there. It was dark and the only light you've got is your headlights. Suddenly the road in front of us lit up. Of course, the immediate reaction is, where's the light coming from? But it was coming from above. We stopped the car, looked up, and there was this thing coming from our right to our left. The object was about 100 feet away. moving at less than 40 miles per hour. It was glowing, like a bright white incandescent glow. And it came right over our heads. The whole unit was glowing. It was as if the metal of what this thing was made of was white hot. And there were these 3 great spheres underneath. Like huge ball bearings. 3 of them equally placed around it. There was a hollow area underneath and like a skirting around the bottom. But these things protruded below that. It was absolutely awe-inspiring to see it. I don't know how to explain it to you. It was such a beautiful looking thing. It seemed to have portholes round the dome. An elongated domed area. And what stood out more than anything else was the colored lights dancing around on the outside of the skirt at the bottom. Which gave the visual impression that it was rotating. Now whether the thing was going round. Or whether it was just the lights that were going round and giving that impression. I don't know. I would say it was the lights that were going round because when you were looking at the portholes, they didn't seem to be going round in a circle as you would have expected. The object was completely soundless. When the thing had passed over our heads, it sort of went into the distance, then suddenly appeared to come down. There's a big wood to our left, right on a distant hillside, and it appeared to go down in that wood. We carried on along this road, and as we got toward the village we could see these lights coming toward us from the other direction. It was another police car. We stopped. And he said, "I've just been watching this damn great UFO. And it seems to have come right down somewhere over here."
A total of 3 policemen witnessed the mysterious object. There is no way this was a conventional aircraft, swamp gas, or any other dismiss out of hand type of explanations. Only 3 possibilities remain. 1. The police were lying for unknown reasons. 2. It was a secret advanced military aircraft of some kind. Or 3. It was a genuine alien craft of unknown origins. You decide.
The year is 1978, the Northamptonshire, England. The victim was driving her car in the late afternoon. At this time she had an encounter with a UFO which resulted in missing time. On November 22, 1978, at 17:15 hours, Elsie Oakenson of Churchstowe, Northamptonshire, was driving southbound down the A5 highway from Weedon back towards her home. When she approached the village of Churchstowe, Northamptonshire, she saw 2 very brilliant lights, a red one and a green one. She said that there had been much traffic, but that all was as in slow motion. The object she was looking at was dumbbell-shaped, made of very soft plastic, gray, without any openings or windows, and approximately 30 meters above the road. She did not want to stop on a high-traffic road where nobody else seemed to have seen the object. She drove on under the object, continuing towards Churchstowe, or her home in Weedon. When she left the main road, she took the lane which ended at her Weedon home, and the car stalled. There could have been 2 stops. Elsie advised. A green light started to flash. I decided to restart the engine, but when I turned into the village something strange happened. The car, which had just been serviced that day, completely cut out. This is said to have occurred when she reached a line of trees at the entry of a farm. Eventually it restarted, but I had only traveled about 100 yards when it stopped again. The natural light disappeared and everything was in absolute blackness. Then suddenly a white circle shining of light approximately a meter in diameter shone on the road immediately after, as if somebody had pressed on a switch. The normal light returned and I drove my car normally. She realized that 15 minutes had passed, which she was unable to explain. After a single unsuccessful attempt to recover memory of the missing time by the use of hypnotic regression, carried out by Martin Keatman, one of the coordinators of the BUFORA Ufology Federation, she was encouraged to try creative visualization on the spot of her UFO sighting by British ufologist Ginny Randalls. Consequently, she was able to remember being led to a place where she was scanned by a brilliant light by shaded and gray forms, one long and thin and the other more rectangular, which appeared and disappeared several times in a fog. Both shone through this fog, in silver gray, smooth and round. She also remembered to feel heat and that her arm was shaking. Apparently, she was not completely satisfactory. She had the feeling that she had been rejected by the entities who brought her back to her car. Ufologist Jenny Randles reported that there had been an independent sighting less than 2 hours after the Okenson encounter, approximately 4 miles away. 4 women, younger than Mrs. Okenson, but who did not know anything of her story, and reciprocally, drove through the village of Preston Capes, and saw colored lights similar to those which had alerted Elsie Okenson, and then they saw parallel beams shot from a cloud. Their car began to lose power and the object paced them, until they entered the village lit by street lamps and the car returned to normal. The UFO lights now merged into one and vanished. Because no clear link between the two encounters had been established then, there was no continuation with these other witnesses to check whether they had also experienced missing time. Elsie Okenson had been so much puzzled by her experience that she wrote 2 books, in 1995 and 1998, about what she thinks was a close encounter of the third kind with extraterrestrial forms of life. She expressed this opinion publicly. She continued to live in Church Stowe, writing articles for spelling journals. My take: there is not much to say about this. I only included it to be more thorough for my 1970s compilation. She is either crazy, lying, or something very unusual happened to her. What do you think? Resources: Ufology at Patrick Gressor. The year is 1979. The place, Didsbury, Manchester. Linda Jones and her 2 children witnessed a UFO craft landing and traveling towards them. Linda went closer to the hovering craft with bright orange lights. Linda experienced some missing time. She also had burn marks on her face from the event. Later she went under hypnosis to recall what kind of mystery she experienced. In the summer of 1979 at around 9:00 p.m., 36-year-old Linda Jones and her 2 children, 5-year-old Christopher and 15-year-old Lisa, were walking along a river bank near Didsbury, Manchester, England. At this time, she advised. It was a summer evening. We were walking along, and I had this wildflower book with me, and I was getting the children interested and asking them. We started playing a little game really to see what that one's called. See if you can identify it. You know that flower. And then my daughter said, Mom. We looked up and we saw this sort of rugby ball shape, which was just hurtling towards us at an angle. We sort of crouched in the long grass quickly to avoid it, because our first thought being it was an aircraft on fire. Goodness me, my life flashed in front of me when I saw this thing. My daughter was absolutely terrified. We then ran up the hill to see what was going on, and we saw this object, which was shaped like a crescent moon. Oh my God, it was physical. It was a physical object. I felt like I could have gone up and touched it. I felt myself sort of drawn to it. Well, really, I just wanted to have a closer look, probably curiosity, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like a bad dream. My daughter called to me to come back. I didn't come back, and I don't actually remember going right up close to it. I got as close as I can, but it seemed to burn my face that the light was too bright. I have never seen anything like that in my life before that day, and have never seen anything since. We didn't look back. We just ran down the hill, and we ran as fast as we could. Linda turned around. She could see the object was moving alongside them. She picked up her younger son and screamed at Lisa to keep running. They made their way across an area of grassland. As they did, though, their surroundings began to appear distorted. The grass, for example, suddenly appeared almost 6 feet tall, and what's more, it was folding down on itself, as if something was pressing down on it. Despite her fear and the fact the behavior of the grass was the strangest thing I have ever seen, Linda continued running into it. Then, she could see their housing estate, still carrying Christopher and with Lisa only slightly behind her. The pair ran as fast as they could to their home, slamming the door shut behind them. Once inside, Linda noticed Trevor was already home. He looked at her and asked, "What's wrong with your eyes?" When Linda glanced into the mirror, she was shocked to see how red and swollen her eyes were, almost scaly. Then, she relayed what had just happened to her husband. Each of them would then draw pictures of the object while it was still fresh in their memory. It was only now that Linda realized she couldn't account for around 90 minutes of time. The incident, which began at just after 9 p.m., was no longer than 10 minutes in length, including the time it took to run home. However, after being back inside 10 minutes, she realized it was now 10:50 p.m. A little over a year passed before Linda began to delve back into the bizarre episode. However, in the winter of 1980, desperate to discover just what happened in those 90 minutes, she would undergo hypnotic regression. Hypnotist: "What's happening?" Linda: "I'm watching the lights." As someone standing next to them in the field. Hypnotist: "Then what?" Linda: "I'm floating. I'm in a room. There are 3 of them around me. 2 big almond-shaped ties. They're wearing jumpsuits of some kind. All in." Hypnotist: "What are they doing?" Linda: "Shining a light in my face. Legs feel so cold." "I see." End of hypnotic session. Linda advised, I really can't believe it's so hard to take on board that sort of thing. And I'm just a very ordinary, normal, down-to-earth human being. Definitely wasn't into that sort of thing. I didn't like anything about science fiction. I've never been interested in that sort of thing at all. So, the answer was why me? Why us on that day? I'm definitely not prone to imaginary things. And it was definitely not an optical illusion. It's pretty hard for one person maybe to have an optical illusion, but for 3 people at the same moment in time to have an optical illusion. The odds are pretty small on that, aren't they? Aftermath of incident. Linda's menstrual cycle was randomly out of sync following the incident. Strange marks would appear on her body from out of nowhere, which would then also vanish just as quickly, sometimes within hours. She began to think there was a connection to the strange evening along the River Mersey. So much so, that she would eventually visit her doctor. When he began speaking of her recent pregnancy and miscarriage following her examination, she was shocked, to say the least. She hadn't been pregnant since giving birth to her son. Determined in his assessment, Linda would receive a referral to a specialist. They would confirm that scarring on her fallopian tubes was the result of an ectopic pregnancy. Linda was again shocked with disbelief at the findings. She was determined that she hadn't suffered a miscarriage, much less an ectopic pregnancy, which is extremely painful and can be fatal if not treated. Truly bizarre incidents would occur in the years that followed the incident too. For example, several years after the encounter, she received a letter asking her to attend hospital for a test and examination. When she chased up results of this, the hospital had no records of her appointment or the doctor she had seen. She still receives these strange written requests for equally strange tests. She also has regular problems with her telephone connections and regular faults on the line. Another incident occurred with her husband in 1988 while driving back from Nottingham after visiting friends there. As they were making their way along the quiet country roads, On several occasions, the car's headlights would fade almost to off before going back to full power. This caused Trevor to pull over to the side of the road, his visibility limited. His hope was to wait for a passing car and then follow it. Suddenly, Trevor told Linda to look up, and there in front and above was a large bright circular craft. It ascended slowly at first and shot upwards to nothing more than a dot with a second. A car drove past several moments later, causing them to put the sighting out of their minds as they followed the vehicle as it cut through the darkness in front of them. After several miles, though, the car just vanished. With the headlights seemingly working fine, Trevor continued, looking for a turning where the car might have gone. However, there was nothing but straight road. The couple also experienced 3 hours of missing time. My take. Linda's face was badly burned from the UFO. This adds some credibility to her story. Hard to think of a reason why she would lie about this. Was the hypnotic regression information about the day of the incident or another time? What do you think? Source: Marcus Loth at UFOinsight.com on February 25, 2019. The year is 1979. The place is a clearing on Detchment Law in Livingston, West Lothian, Scotland. Bob Taylor, a forestry worker, had an encounter with a UFO. The UFO dragged him along the ground. This is considered to be one of the most significant close encounters in Scotland. On November 9, 1978, at 10:30 a.m., Bob Taylor advised that he had been working alone checking fences and gates at Detchment Woods at 10:30 when he came across the spaceship in a clearing. After the spiked objects rushed out and tried to grab hold of him, all he could remember was a strong smell of burning. When he came to, the clearing was empty, apart from a pattern of deep regular marks on the ground. He went to his van, but was so shaken he drove it into a ditch and had to stagger home in a dazed condition. When he got to his house, he told his wife Mary he had been attacked by a spaceship thing. Because Mr. Taylor was in such a state, the police were called and officers found themselves inquiring into an assault on a forester by alien beings. Detective Constable Ian Ward, the scene of crime investigator, arrived at the clearing to find a large gathering of police officers were already there. There were about 32 holes, which were about 3.5 inches in diameter, as well as marks similar to those made by the type of caterpillar tracks often fitted on bulldozers. After examining every piece of machinery they had up there, "We did not find anything to match," he said. The police officer said that the unusual marks on the ground were only to be found in the clearing where Mr. Taylor had experienced his reported close encounter. "These marks just arrived," Detective Constable Wark said. "They did not come from anywhere or go anywhere. They just arrived as though a helicopter or something had landed from the sky." The police report from the time said the marks on the ground indicated an object of several tons had stood there, but there was nothing to show that it had been driven or towed away. PC William Douglas wrote, "There appeared to be no rational explanation for these marks. As part of the police investigation, Mr. Taylor's ripped trousers were sent for forensic examination, but this was many years before modern DNA techniques, so analysis concentrated on how the damage had been done. Police forensics said the trousers seemed to have been damaged by something hooking them and moving up." In his testimony to the police, the 61-year-old described how he saw a 30-feet-high dome-shaped object in a clearing in the forest near the West Lothian. He told how 2 spiked spheres then rolled out towards him, and, as he passed out, he was aware of being grabbed on either side of his legs. Mr. Taylor woke up in a disheveled state 20 minutes later. Mr. Taylor, who died in 2007, was a respected war hero and teetotal churchgoer. No one doubted that he was sincere in what he believed he had seen, and throughout the rest of his life he never deviated from his story. Mr. Taylor's trousers are now in the possession of Malcolm Robinson, a ufologist who has been investigating such cases since the Detchment incident. He said they were police-issue blue serge trousers, and the type of rips in them did not happen by getting snagged as Mr. Taylor crawled away on the ground. Mr. Robinson, who has given lectures on the incident across the UK, Holland, France, and the US and written a book on the subject, said it was one of the most incredible cases in the world. He said it was one of very few hardcore cases that defied any explanation. Last year a UFO trail opened which takes people to the spot where a new town forestry foreman claims he saw an alien spaceship. My take. Bob Taylor kept to his story until his death in 2007. The marks on the ground have not been explained by anyone. My question is, why did the UFO attack him? When he was unconscious, what did they do to him? What do you think? Resources: Stephen Brockley Hurst at BBC.com, November 9, 2019.